Well, hello, everybody. If you don't know where you're at, you have found Teacher Talk with Vernon. And I appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend some time with me as we continue studying the book of Ruth. We are joining them again. We're still in chapter 3 of the book of Ruth. We're following the story of two widows seeking rest in the land of Israel. One widow is Jewish, one is Gentile. And together they represent Israel and the church. And they have met Boaz, the man willing to care and provide for them. Now for Ruth, Boaz entered into a personal covenant to care for Ruth. For Naomi, Boaz is discreetly making provision available through Ruth. Now Boaz is a picture of Christ, and his relationship with each of these women portrays Christ's relationship with God's chosen people and with the Gentile church. So while Israel has been set aside in a period of judgment, the church has entered into a relationship with Christ. But Israel hasn't been forgotten. In a time to come, they will be restored as well. Now, these two stories are intertwined in the story of Ruth. One story of two widows who work together to obtain the rest that they desperately want, and a second story about two groups of people who obtain eternal rest by the grace of a common Savior. As we got to the end of chapter 2, the season of harvest is coming to an end, and Ruth has spent the season working in Boaz's field. The work's been easy and rewarding because Boaz has made it easy and rewarding. And it gave Ruth and Naomi the security that they wanted, that they were seeking. But in these details, we also saw a prophecy of God's plan for Israel and the church. Israel would enter into a period of judgment as a result of her disobedience to the old covenant. During that time, the nation will experience trial after trial, making the nation weak and reduced in number. During that time, the Gentile church would come into a relationship with Israel's Messiah, and it would do so through the influence of the Jewish people, through their scriptures and according to their promised covenant. So eventually, the time for Israel's judgment would give way to a time of testimony. And in that moment, Christ's relationship with both Israel and the Gentile church would change in significant ways. And those changes are where we're going to go next in this story, starting with how Naomi and Ruth's relationship to Boaz changes in chapter 3. Now, the harvest season is drawing to a close, and so Naomi's concerns over rest are coming back. What are we going to do now? How are these two widows going to get by during the long winter? Will Boaz's kindness continue after the harvest is over? So, not wanting to wait until things kind of play out on their own, Naomi starts to launch a plan to help Ruth cement her relationship with Boaz and ensure that this season of provision becomes a lifetime of support. So in Ruth chapter 3, verse 1, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now is not Boaz our kinsman, with whose maids you were? Behold, he winnows barley at the threshing floor tonight. Wash yourself, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. It shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will tell you what you shall do." She said to her, "All that you say, I will do." So Naomi's plan centers on Boaz's role as the kinsman to Naomi. So just as a review, Boaz is Elimelech's relative. So he's part of the extended family of Naomi. And according to the law, he's the man expected to rescue Naomi's family from widowhood. But as we talked about before, Naomi's too old now to be taken as a wife, but Ruth is still young enough to marry, and that's Naomi's hope. Ruth's decision to remain with Naomi has become Naomi's best hope for security. Because if Ruth remarries, then Naomi knows that she'll be welcomed into the home as well. So Naomi's future is tied to Ruth. Now, Naomi explains to Ruth that her relationship with Boaz is the key to their continued survival after the end of the harvest. And she says she's going to seek security for Ruth. And this is the turning point in the story of Ruth. The Hebrew word translated security here is manoach, which literally translated means a place of rest. So Naomi finally sees a way to obtain rest, both for her and for Ruth. Now, to the Hebrew mind, rest is a very sacred term. Theologically, we speak of being saved in the same way that Hebrews spoke of obtaining rest. Obtaining rest means so much more than just simply finding a comfortable living. Manoach means ceasing to worry, ceasing to struggle, ceasing to doubt, ceasing to be in jeopardy by obtaining a permanent source of blessing. So finding rest has been the desire of Naomi's heart from the very beginning of our story. She followed her husband outside her land, seeking rest from a famine. But his decision led the family to experience just one tragedy after another. First, her husband died, then her sons died, and she found herself homeless and destitute in a foreign land. The family had done everything it could and by its own power to find rest, but things had only gone from bad to worse. So Naomi and Ruth returned to the land, still looking for rest. Now, meeting Boaz gave them a measure of provision and protection in the land, but this is not true manoach, rest. It's temporary provision at best, and when your hope lies in something temporary, it's not rest. If you're having trouble making your bills this month and you get a windfall or you get a bonus at work and that takes care of your bills for this month, you still haven't found rest because now you got to start worrying about next month. And that's what Naomi's thinking about right now. So rest is something that we all want. And we know how Naomi and Ruth feel looking for rest from the disappointments and the insecurities of daily life. Rest seems forever out of reach. Every phase of our lives is a pursuit of some kind of satisfaction. But for a lot of us, it's like living in a rock song. We strive in school expecting to enjoy the security of a good job. We get the job, then we find out we have to work overtime to afford the things that we think are going to bring us comfort and rest. We get the things, but then they never bring us the joy that we thought they would. And we continue to struggle for a lifetime to be ready for the retirement that will finally give us some rest. And then as we get closer to retirement, we start to worry there won't be enough to last, enough money, enough health, enough friends, enough purpose. What are we supposed to do in retirement anyway? So if we're not careful, we're going to fill our lives with striving and regrets so that as the end approaches, we're going to be left with worry that life just passed us by. We worked our whole life for some kind of rest, and it was always just out of reach. Where's the satisfaction? Where's the rest, the security, the freedom from want and worry that we were striving so hard to obtain? For those Christians who lead this kind of life, the problem isn't that rest can't be found. The problem is they were always looking for rest in the wrong place. And, as the saying goes, we all want to go to heaven, but you just don't want to go today. So in that sense, we're like Naomi's family. We're working to secure a rest that couldn't be found outside the land. Their rest was found in a Redeemer that they never saw coming. But now that they have him, they're anxious to move to the next step of the plan. And just like us, as we've come to know our Redeemer, our protector, our provider, he's made promises to us and he's directed us to work in his field, but we're eager to see him bring us into the rest that we want to know so badly. That's the true eternal rest in the kingdom. While you wait, don't make the mistake of thinking you can accelerate his plan, that you can get true rest on your own. True rest isn't going to come while we're working in his field. Our true rest, the true relief from sin and disappointment and conflict and all the unfulfilled longings of our life comes only in the kingdom. And if we think we can find that rest while we're still working in the field, we're going to be distracted from the work of serving Christ, and we're going to wander into somebody else's field. And we're not going to find that peace and that rest that we were looking for because it was never there. But we can know a measure of that rest even now if we know what to look for. We're not going to escape working. But if we make our work building the kingdom, then our work can be as joyful and as easy as Ruth's work was in Boaz's field. We may not obtain earthly riches, but we can learn to be content with less if it means obtaining riches in the kingdom. We won't escape trials, but we can endure them gladly, knowing that Christ is testing us to know if we're worthy of greater things in the kingdom. So in other words, we can withstand a lifetime of striving with Christ to obtain an eternity of rest with Christ. So at the start of chapter 3, Naomi and Ruth are seeking to find that true rest, and Naomi sees an opportunity to secure it. Now, Naomi's been waiting the entire harvest season for Boaz to fulfill the levirate marriage requirement of the law. And remember, the levirate marriage law expected the closest relative to marry a widow who lacked a son. Through a levirate marriage, the widow might receive a son and an inheritance for her dead husband. And a husband and a son for these women would mean true rest. In a patriarchal culture like this, a husband and a son would bring the protection and the provision for life that both of these women in our story are seeking desperately, if only Boaz would decide to meet the terms of the law. One of these widows needs to pursue the relationship in a cautious manner, but which one should seek his proposal? Well, obviously, Naomi's childbearing days are over, so it falls to Ruth. And Naomi instructs Ruth to take a bold step to prompt Boaz into assuming the levirate marriage responsibilities. She tells Ruth in verse 2 that Boaz is sleeping on the threshing floor during the harvest. Now, remember, we talked about this before. At the end of a harvest, the bundles of grain are taken to the threshing floor. And you bring the stalks of grain in, you have oxen trample on them to kind of separate the husks or the grain and the husk. And sometimes you beat them to do that. And then you pick them up with a pitchfork, you toss them in the air, and the wind blows the chaff, the husks, away from the heavier grain, and the grain falls back down on the floor, and then you can pick up the grain and collect it. Now, it was usually done at night because in the Middle East, in late summer, the hot, dry climate produces a little bit of breeze, a little more breeze at night than it does during the day. So in the first half of the night, the threshing begins with the beating of the grain, followed by the winnowing, the pitchfork, until about midnight. And then the work ceases and they have a big meal. And then they sleep by their heaps of grain to guard them so nobody comes in and steals it. Naomi knew how the harvest worked, so she saw an opportunity for Ruth to approach Boaz on this night and appeal to him to fulfill the law for her sake. And she tells Ruth how to approach Boaz to encourage a proposal for marriage. First, she is to wash herself and anoint herself and put on her best clothes. Now, these are the steps that a bride takes before wedding. In this day, a bride was betrothed to her husband weeks or even months prior to the wedding day. And during this time, the bride lived apart from her groom in a state of perpetual readiness. She was always ready for the groom to appear. And now on an unannounced day, she didn't know what day, but her groom would come to claim her and escort her to the wedding ceremony. So Naomi is coaching Ruth to present herself as a woman ready for her groom. Now, secondly, Naomi tells Ruth to find Boaz at the threshing floor. In the time of harvest, the threshing floor would have been a very busy place, also a very happy place. It was a place where a year's worth of hard work was rewarded, and each night's feast would be a joyful affair. And it's the place where Naomi knew that Ruth could find Boaz and find him in a good mood. And now notice she tells Ruth to wait until the eating and drinking has completed. She's telling Ruth to be patient and wait for the right moment when things have kind of quieted down a little bit. And then finally in verse 4, Naomi tells Ruth to lie down discreetly next to Boaz and uncover his feet. It's kind of weird. Men in this day wore robes that covered even their feet. So as they would lay down to sleep, their robes formed a blanket over them. Naomi wants Ruth to discreetly pull up Boaz's robe just far enough to expose Boaz's feet to the cool desert night air. And this seemed kind of weird to us, but Naomi knew what she was doing. She's drawing on a Jewish custom, one that Naomi expects Boaz to understand. And we can see this because in verse 4, Naomi tells Ruth that Boaz will tell her what to do next. Now, what is Naomi up to here? By taking these actions, Ruth will be letting Boaz know that she's willing to be his wife if he should desire to marry her. In Israel, uncovering someone in this manner was an allusion to marriage. We see this idea reflected in Scripture in various places. In Ezekiel, the Lord describes entering into a covenant with his wife, Israel, this way. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 7. I made you numerous like plants of the field. Then you grew up, became tall, and reached the age for fine ornaments. Your breasts were formed and your hair had grown, yet you were naked and bare. Then I passed by you and saw you, and behold, you were at the time for love. So I spread my skirt over you and covered your nakedness. I also swore to you and entered into a covenant with you so that you became mine, declares the Lord God. So notice God says he spread his skirt over Israel and covered her nakedness. That's symbolic language. It represents a spiritual marriage through the old covenant. So in the same way, entering into a sexual union is described that same way. Deuteronomy 22:30 says, a man shall not take his father's wife so that he will not uncover his father's skirt. Deuteronomy 27:20, cursed is he who lies with his father's wife because he has uncovered his father's skirt, and all the people shall say amen. So when Naomi asks Ruth to lift up Boaz's cloak or his robe to expose his feet, she's sending a very clear message to Boaz. By uncovering his feet, Ruth is inviting a marriage proposal. She's saying, hey, if you want to ask me to marry you, I'm up for that. She's implying that when Boaz acts to recover his cold feet, he's welcome to cover hers as well. Now, some have chosen to take this very innocent moment and pervert it by suggesting that Ruth was uncovering more than Boaz's feet. Others have suggested Naomi was encouraging Ruth to make her own proposal to Boaz. But this is not what the text is telling us. In reality, Naomi was asking Ruth only to uncover Boaz's feet, just enough exposure to make a point and no more. And she wasn't proposing to Boaz. Boaz has already initiated this relationship with his earlier promises to Ruth, but he hasn't moved the relationship ahead, partly because he's considerably older than Ruth, and he figured, well, she wants a younger husband. So Ruth's actions were a way for her to politely indicate her willingness to consider marriage to Boaz. Also, Naomi has ensured that the encounter would take place in the most discreet manner possible. She'll make a big fuss about it. It was dark. A lot of people were gathered in a large area, sleeping in the open. Under those circumstances, Ruth's appearance at the feet of Boaz would not have attracted a whole lot of attention. And as she uncovers Boaz's feet and waits for his response, no one would have known what was going on either way. Boaz could he could respond either way without concern for his reputation. So with that, Ruth sets out to obey her mother-in-law. Ruth chapter 3, verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came secretly and uncovered his feet and lay down. It happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled and bent forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative." Then he said, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask, for all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence. Now, it is true I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Remain this night, and when morning comes, if he will redeem you, good, let him redeem you. But if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning. So, Ruth executes Naomi's plan perfectly. When Boaz awoke to find Ruth there and his feet uncovered, he asked Ruth who she was and what her intentions were. So it was dark. He didn't recognize her. And everybody was in shadows. And Ruth responds, she says, tells him who she is. And she says, I'm here so you can spread your covering over your maid. And she says, you're a close relative. Now, the Hebrew word for close relative is the same word for kinsman redeemer. So Ruth is politely saying, I am willing to have you as my redeemer if you are willing to fulfill the law on my behalf. And Naomi expected her plan to bring Ruth and Boaz to this point. She has enough faith in Boaz's character to expect that he'll do the right thing. So in response to Ruth's overture, Boaz responds with joy, declaring that her first kindness to him has been exceeded by this kindness. And you read that and you think, what is he saying there? Because it was Boaz who showed kindness to Ruth in the first place. But Ruth showed respect and kindness to Boaz. Her first act of kindness towards Boaz was to serve him well as a maidservant. She showed Boaz kindness in her devoted service during the harvest season. She worked every day, all day, rewarding his trust. Every servant in Boaz's household was blessed to be a part of Boaz's household. But not every servant returned that favor by blessing Boaz with faithful obedience. So Boaz was blessed by Ruth's service. So now Ruth is willing to forego younger men and become Boaz's wife, which was a second act of kindness towards him. Boaz notes that Ruth hasn't gone after younger men. From his perspective, Ruth is very young and attractive, and as an older man, he must have assumed that she's looking past him, looking for a younger husband. It just makes sense. But she's remained devoted to Boaz. She's gladly seeking to be his bride. So once again, it's Ruth who would be gaining the blessing of a husband, but Boaz is likewise blessed by her affection, just as every man is blessed by the affection of a loving wife. So in response to Ruth's kindness, Boaz pledges to do what he can to make the wedding happen, but there's an obstacle. There's always an obstacle, right? Here we learn the second reason that Boaz hadn't moved yet to redeem Ruth or Naomi. Boaz is not the closest living relative to these women. There's another man who has first right to redeem any widow in Elimelech's family. So Boaz has been prevented from acting for this reason. Now remember, the levirate marriage rule in the law required that the closest relative be the one to redeem the widow. And marrying a beautiful young woman was not considered an act of sacrifice, but of privilege. So before Boaz could take Ruth, he had to give the closest relative the right of first refusal. And Boaz was a man who made sure that the law was followed exactly. So therefore, Boaz says he will address this conflict in the morning. So in the morning, he's going to go find this guy and see if he can redeem Ruth. And if the closer relative is unable to meet the terms of the levirate law, then Boaz will step into his place and redeem Ruth. One way or the other, Ruth and Naomi are finally going to get the rest that they've been looking for. But now, going back to our second story, remember Ruth pictures the Gentile church betrothed to our groom, Christ. Like Ruth, we feel as though we are the ones blessed by our relationship with Christ, and we certainly are. In fact, we don't have a clue how blessed we are. We can't possibly appreciate all the glory that our relationship with Christ will bring us in time. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2:9, but just as it is written, things which eye has not seen and ear has not heard, and which have not entered into the heart of man, all that God has prepared for those who love him. But also like Ruth, despite the fact that we receive so much from Christ, nevertheless, we can be a blessing to him. Ruth blessed Boaz in response to his kindness by working diligently in his field. We can also bless the Lord, who has extended grace to us, by serving him faithfully in his field, which is the world. It's a small thing when you think about it, really. Where would Ruth have been without Boaz's kindness? Where would we be had the Lord not extended his grace to change the eternal course of our lives? How lonely, how frustrated, how desperate, how hopeless might we be today without Christ? So if you've wished that you could find a way to repay the Lord or show him your thanks, here's the way we do it. Paul sums it up in Romans 12. Romans 12:1, therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. It's the reasonable thing to do. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. If you want to bless God, serve him sacrificially. Bless him by forsaking other more attractive suitors and remain devoted to him. Set aside your desires for earthly riches, fame, power, accomplishment, pleasures, whatever. Don't waste time striving for the rest that only comes in the kingdom. Just get up every day, go serve in the field, look for ways to bless the Lord. And when the harvest comes, we'll have our rest, just as these women are about to receive theirs. So that's where we're going to stop today. I try to keep these lessons right around 30 minutes so nobody gets bored or lost. And so I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson. I hope you're enjoying going through the book of Ruth. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors to tune in. I'm not seeking to make money from this or anything, but I am seeking to reach as many people as I can. And just tell them, go to Teacher Talk with Vernon and start watching videos. And if you enjoyed the videos, leave a comment if you can. And just, let me know what you like about it, what you don't like about it. Let me know if I'm confusing you or making things clear for you. And let me know, what you'd like to study, and maybe I can, work up a study according to what you're looking for in the future. So anyway, we'll close out for now till we meet again next week. God bless.